The mirror in this Charleston hotel bathroom reflects a version of myself I don't recognize. The tie around my neck isn't mine. It's Julian's, navy blue with thin silver threads that catch the light when I move. My fingers work the knot mechanically, muscle memory from years of formal events I never wanted to attend, but the face staring back at me looks foreign. Older, maybe. More exposed. Like someone wearing clothes meant for a life they never chose to live. The bathroom is all marble and brass fixtures, the kind of understated luxury that whispers money without shouting it. Everything here is polished to perfection, including me, apparently. My hair is combed back in a way that makes my jawline sharper, my eyes more serious. I look like I belong at a wedding, which is strange because I've spent most of my 36 years actively avoiding occasions that require ties. Behind me, Julian stands in the doorway. I can see him in the mirror's reflection, holding 2 glasses of bourbon, amber liquid catching the warm light from the vanity bulbs. He's watching me with that quiet intensity he's always had, the one that used to make me nervous in college when we'd sit up too late talking about everything and nothing. His shirt is white and pressed, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and there's something about the way he's positioned himself, one shoulder against the doorframe, patient but purposeful, that makes my chest tighten. The silence between us has weight. Outside, through the bathroom's small window, I can hear the distant sounds of the wedding reception beginning below. Laughter drifts up from the courtyard, the gentle clink of champagne glasses, the low murmur of conversation that comes when people are trying to be elegant. It's Julian's wedding reception, technically. Or it was supposed to be. I adjust the tie again, though it doesn't need adjusting. My hands are steadier than I expected them to be, considering everything that's happened in the last 24 hours. Considering the way Julian called me 3 weeks ago, his voice different somehow, asking if I'd come to Charleston with him. Not asking if I'd attend his wedding, asking if I'd come with him. Like we were still 22 and inseparable, before everything got complicated and we stopped returning each other's calls. Julian's voice cuts through the quiet, low and careful. For this weekend, let's just pretend. Just you and me. I don't answer right away. The words hang in the air between us, loaded with implications I'm not sure either of us is ready to examine. My pulse is suddenly loud in my ears, thudding against my collar where Julian's tie sits snug against my throat. There's something absurd about this moment. Me in his clothes, him watching me get dressed for a wedding that isn't happening. Both of us pretending this is normal. But underneath the absurdity is something much deeper, something that's been sitting in my chest for 14 years, growing heavier with each passing season. The wedding music below shifts, becomes more celebratory. Someone is making a toast, voices rising in unison, and I wonder if they're toasting Julian and Amelia, or if they've moved on to other celebrations, other people's happiness. I wonder if Amelia is down there, radiant in white, wondering where her groom has gone. I wonder if she knows about me, about this weekend, about the way Julian said my name when he called, like he was remembering how to pronounce something precious. Julian hasn't moved from the doorway. His eyes are fixed on mine in the mirror, dark and unreadable. There's bourbon in both glasses, probably the expensive kind Julian always preferred, and I can smell it from here, warm and smoky. It reminds me of late nights in our dorm room, studying for finals or not studying at all, just talking until dawn broke through our cheap curtains. I think about the last time we spoke before his phone call 3 weeks ago. It was almost 2 years ago, a brief exchange at our mutual friend David's birthday party in Atlanta. Julian was there with Amelia, his arm around her waist, introducing her to everyone as his fiancée. I shook her hand, told her she was lucky, smiled when she said she'd heard so much about me. Julian barely met my eyes that night. We exchanged maybe 10 words, polite and distant, like acquaintances catching up at a high school reunion. But now he's here, in this hotel bathroom, asking me to pretend. And the strange thing is, it doesn't feel like pretending. It feels like remembering. I reach for one of the glasses, my fingers brushing Julian's as I take it. His skin is warm, familiar in a way that makes my throat close. The bourbon is smooth, expensive, with notes of vanilla and oak that linger on my tongue. Julian takes a sip from his own glass, never breaking eye contact with my reflection. The wedding sounds below are getting louder, more joyful. Someone is laughing, a woman's voice bright with champagne and happiness. I wonder if it's Amelia. I wonder if she's looking for Julian, if she's starting to worry. I wonder what Julian told her when he left her at the altar 3 hours ago, what explanation he gave for walking away from the life they'd planned together. But Julian's eyes in the mirror hold no trace of regret, no shadow of the man who was supposed to say, "I do," this afternoon. There's only this quiet intensity, this waiting. Like he's asked me a question that goes far deeper than pretending for a weekend, and he's giving me all the time I need to answer. I take another sip of bourbon, feeling it warm my chest, loosen something that's been tight for years. The tie feels less foreign now, less like a costume. In the mirror, Julian and I look like we belong together, not just in this expensive hotel room, but in general. Like two people who found their way back to something they lost a long time ago. The absurdity of the moment crashes over me again. Here we are, dressed for a wedding that didn't happen, sharing expensive bourbon in a bathroom that costs more per night than I make in a week. Julian asked me to pretend we're together for the weekend, and somehow, standing here in his tie, I realize I've been pretending we weren't together for the past 14 years. I set the glass down on the marble counter, the sound sharp and final in the quiet. Julian's reflection watches me, waiting. Outside, the celebration continues without us, without him, the bride and groom, who never were. But in here, in this moment suspended between what was and what might be, I finally understand what Julian was really asking when he called me 3 weeks ago. He wasn't asking me to come to his wedding. He was asking me to come home. I turn away from the mirror, away from the stranger in Julian's clothes, and face him directly. He's smaller than I remembered, or maybe I've grown larger with time and distance. But his eyes are exactly the same, dark brown with flecks of gold, the kind of eyes that see too much and forgive more than they should. Okay, I say. The word comes out steady, sure, like I've been planning to say it all along. But we both know I don't mean just the weekend. I mean all of it, the pretending, the not pretending, the coming home to something we never properly said goodbye to. Julian's shoulders relax, like he's been holding his breath for 14 years and can finally exhale. The wedding music below shifts again, becomes softer, more romantic. They're probably dancing now, the guests who stayed, swaying to something slow and sweet while the bride dances alone, or with her father, or with anyone who isn't the groom who walked away. But up here, Julian steps closer, close enough that I can smell his cologne, the same one he wore in college, cedar and bergamot, and something indefinably him. He doesn't touch me, not yet. We just stand there, two men in wedding clothes, holding empty bourbon glasses, surrounded by marble and brass and the sound of other people's happiness. But for the first time in 14 years, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I've built my life deliberately small. At 36, I live in a one-bedroom apartment above Fletcher's Rare Books on Bull Street in Savannah, where the air always smells like old paper and binding glue. My landlord, Mrs. Fletcher, is 73 and treats me more like a son than a tenant, bringing me sweet tea on Thursdays and worrying aloud about my lack of a social life. The apartment suits me perfectly, just enough space for a bed, a reading chair, and the workbench where I restore antique books, breathing life back into spines that have forgotten how to hold themselves together. My days follow a pattern I've cultivated over years of careful practice. I wake at 6, make coffee in the same blue mug I've used since graduate school, and spend the morning hours in my workshop with delicate tools and patient hands. There's something sacred about restoration work, taking something broken and making it whole again, even if the scars still show. The books that come to me are usually damaged beyond what most people would consider salvageable. Water stains, torn pages, bindings that crack when you breathe on them. But I see their potential, the stories they still want to tell. I speak to my sister Caroline every Tuesday at 7 in the evening. She lives in Portland with her husband and 2 daughters, and our conversations follow the same comfortable rhythm. Her updates about the girls' soccer games and school plays, my updates about particularly interesting restoration projects. She's never asked why I moved to Savannah, or why I live alone, or why I've never brought anyone home for Christmas. Caroline understands that some people need more space between themselves and the world, and I've always been grateful for her quiet acceptance. My social circle is small by design. There's Marcus, who owns the coffee shop 3 blocks down and saves me the good pastries on Sunday mornings. There's Dr. Reeves at the university, who sends me the most challenging restoration work and pays well for discretion. A handful of acquaintances from the Historical Society, People who appreciate craftsmanship and don't ask personal questions. It's a good life, a safe life. I sleep well at night, knowing exactly what each day will bring. Then Julian called. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks ago. I was reading in bed, a biography of a Civil War bookbinder, when my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Julian Morrison. Even seeing his name on the screen made something twist in my chest. Muscle memory from a time when his calls meant late-night conversations that lasted until dawn. His voice sounded different. Older, maybe, or tired in a way I didn't remember. He said my name like he was testing whether he still knew how to pronounce it correctly. Nathaniel. Then a pause, like he was gathering courage. I'm getting married, he said. In Charleston. Next month. I waited for the rest, the part where he'd explain why he was calling after 2 years of silence. Instead, he asked if I'd received the invitation. I had. A heavy cream envelope with Julian Morrison and Amelia Crawford embossed in gold script, arriving 6 weeks earlier. I'd held it for a long time before opening it, remembering the weight of Julian's handwriting, though this was clearly printed by professionals. I told him yes, I'd received it. Congratulations, I said, because that's what you're supposed to say when someone you used to love tells you they're marrying someone else. Another pause. Then, would you come with me? Not would I attend the wedding. Would I come with him? The distinction felt important, though I couldn't have explained why. I asked what he meant, and Julian laughed, a sound I remembered from college when he was nervous about something he wanted but wasn't sure he deserved. Like old times, he said. You and me. I know it's been a while, but I keep thinking about senior year, about how we used to drive down to the coast just to get away from everything. Remember that? I remembered. Spring break, 2011. We'd driven to Tybee Island in Julian's ancient Honda, staying in a motel that smelled like cigarettes and sea salt. We'd spent 3 days walking the beach, talking about our futures, about the photography fellowship Julian was applying for in Chicago, about my acceptance to the graduate program in library science. We'd shared a room with 2 beds and spent most of the time on one of them, not touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth. The last night, Julian had rolled over and said something so quietly I almost missed it. He said he was going to miss this. Miss us. I pretended to be asleep. Julian Morrison at 34 is nothing like the uncertain boy I knew in college. The Julian who called me that Tuesday night is a successful photographer living in Chicago, the kind of person who gets written up in art magazines and has gallery showings with wine and cheese, and people who know how to talk about lighting and composition. I've looked him up online more times than I care to admit, scrolling through images of his work, intimate portraits of strangers, faces caught in moments of unguarded honesty. He has a gift for making people comfortable enough to show him who they really are. He's charming in the way that makes rooms feel smaller when he enters them. Charismatic in the effortless way some people are born with. The kind of man who remembers your name after meeting you once, who asks about your mother's health and actually listens to the answer. Women have always been drawn to him, and Julian has always been kind about it, never cruel or dismissive. In college, I watched him navigate attention with grace, choosing carefully who deserved his time. Amelia Crawford is beautiful in the way that photographs well. I've seen her in Julian's social media posts, blonde and elegant, with the kind of smile that suggests she's never had to doubt whether she belongs somewhere. She works in arts administration, has a master's degree from Northwestern, comes from the kind of family that has summer houses and knows which fork to use for salad. In every photo, she and Julian look like they were designed to stand next to each other. But that night on the phone, Julian's voice carried something I recognized from our college days. A restlessness, a question he couldn't quite ask directly. He told me about the wedding plans, about Amelia's family, about the venue in Charleston's historic district. He told me about his latest gallery showing, about a photography project documenting small-town diners across the Midwest. He filled the silence with words, the way he always did when he was avoiding saying what he really meant. Finally, near midnight, I asked him why he was really calling. Because I need you there, he said, and for a moment his voice was 22 again, uncertain and honest. Because I can't do this alone. I should have said no. Should have wished him well and hung up and returned to my small, safe life. Instead, I heard myself saying yes before I fully understood what I was agreeing to. Now, standing in this Charleston hotel room 3 weeks later, I realized Julian never really answered my question about why he called. But maybe the answer is in the way he's looking at me now, like I'm someone he's been searching for without realizing he was lost. The drive to Charleston takes 4 hours, and for the first 2, it feels like wearing an old coat that doesn't quite fit anymore. Julian picks me up at 8 in the morning in a rental car that smells like vanilla air freshener and new leather. He looks different in daylight, older around the eyes, more careful in the way he moves. His hair is shorter than it was in college, professionally styled, and he's wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. But when he smiles at me through my apartment window before I come downstairs, it's the same crooked grin that used to make my stomach flip during organic chemistry lectures. He fills the silence with stories about Amelia, about his photography, about his travels to places I've only seen in books. Prague in winter, where he spent 3 weeks documenting street musicians. A gallery opening in New York, where someone bought one of his portraits for more money than I make in a year. The apartment he and Amelia share in Lincoln Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Lake Michigan. His voice is animated when he talks, hands gesturing even while he drives, painting pictures of a life that sounds like it belongs to someone else entirely. I listen, nod, answer softly when he asks about my work. I tell him about a first-edition Whitman I'm restoring, about Mrs. Fletcher's campaign to get me to attend her church social, about Caroline's youngest daughter learning to play violin. My life sounds small next to his, which is exactly how I've always preferred it. But sitting in this rental car, watching Julian's profile as he talks, I feel the smallness differently. Not safe, but limited. Not peaceful, but lonely. Something else lingers under the surface of our conversation, threading through his stories about Amelia and gallery openings. The way Julian glances at me when he thinks I'm not looking, his eyes lingering on my hands when I gesture. The way his voice softens when he says my name, like he's remembering the weight of it. When he reaches for the gear shift, his fingers brush mine on the center console, and neither of us pulls away or apologizes. The touch is brief, accidental, but it sends warmth shooting up my arm that has nothing to do with the South Carolina sun streaming through the windshield. We stop for gas outside of Beaufort, and Julian buys coffee and road trip snacks with the kind of easy generosity I remember from college. He knows I take my coffee black, knows I prefer salt and vinegar chips to anything sweet. Small things, but they suggest he's been paying attention to details I thought he'd forgotten. When we reach Charleston, the city unfolds around us like something from a postcard. Cobblestone streets and wrought iron balconies, Spanish moss hanging from ancient oaks like wedding veils. Julian navigates the historic district with confidence, pointing out landmarks as we drive. The Rainbow Row houses painted in sherbet colors, the market where his grandmother used to buy sweetgrass baskets, the church where Amelia wanted to get married before they settled on the hotel garden. The boutique hotel where we're staying sits on a quiet street lined with palmetto trees. It's the kind of place that charges $500 a night for the privilege of sleeping in a room smaller than my apartment, but everything about it whispers understated elegance. The lobby smells like magnolia and expensive candles, and the desk clerk treats us like visiting royalty. Julian handles the check-in, sliding his credit card across marble countertops while I stand behind him feeling underdressed in my khakis and button-down shirt. When the clerk hands him the key cards, Julian turns to me with something uncertain flickering in his eyes. "Let's just pretend we're together for the weekend," he says, pressing the second key card into my palm. People won't ask questions that way. I laugh at first, because it seems absurd. 2 grown men pretending to be a couple to avoid awkward wedding small talk. But Julian's eyes hold something deeper than convenience, something that makes the laugh die in my throat. There's an old hurt there, a memory of something left unfinished. I think about that last night in college, about the way Julian had looked at me across our dorm room, like he wanted to say something important but couldn't find the words. About how I'd pretended to fall asleep rather than hear whatever confession was building in the space between us. The weight of the key card in my hand feels significant, like accepting it means more than just sharing a hotel room for 2 nights. But Julian is watching me with that patient intensity one remember, the same expression he used to wear when he was waiting for me to catch up to something he'd already figured out. I agree, thinking it's a harmless game. Just pretend, just for the weekend. But even as I say the words, my chest begins to ache in ways I can't name. Because standing in this elegant hotel lobby, Julian close enough that I can smell his cologne. I realize I've been pretending for 14 years already. Pretending that I didn't think about him every Tuesday when Caroline asked about my love life. Pretending that I didn't save every article about his gallery showings. Pretending that seeing his name on my phone 3 weeks ago didn't make me feel more alive than I had in months. Julian smiles when I nod, relief flooding his features like he'd been holding his breath. He touches my shoulder briefly, a gesture that could be friendly or could be something more, and leads me toward the elevator. In the mirrored walls, we look like a couple, not staged or forced, but natural, like we've been walking through hotel lobbies together for years. The elevator rises slowly, old-fashioned and elegant, and Julian studies our reflection with something like wonder. For this weekend, he says quietly, like he's testing the words, "Just you and me." I watch him in the mirror. This man who was my closest friend, and might have been more, who disappeared from my life and reappeared 3 weeks before his wedding to ask me to pretend we belong together. The elevator stops at our floor with a gentle chime, and Julian gestures for me to exit first, his hand briefly touching the small of my back. Walking down the hallway toward our room, I understand that whatever game we're about to play, it started long before we arrived in Charleston. It started that night in college when Julian almost said something and I pretended to be asleep. It started with a phone call 3 weeks ago that felt like coming home. It started the moment I said yes to something I didn't fully understand but couldn't refuse. Julian slides the key card into the lock, and the door opens onto a room with a view of the garden where he's supposed to marry Amelia tomorrow. But standing here beside him, I can't shake the feeling that the real ceremony is about to begin. The rehearsal dinner unfolds in the hotel's private dining room like something from a magazine spread. Candles flicker on tables dressed in cream linen, and the sound of silverware against china mingles with polite laughter and the gentle clink of wine glasses. Amelia moves through the room like she was born for moments like this, radiant in a navy dress that probably costs more than I spend on groceries in 3 months. She greets each guest with genuine warmth, her hand frequently finding Julian's arm as she introduces him to relatives and family friends. Julian and I sit together at a table near the windows, and something shifts the moment we take our seats. His arm comes to rest on the back of my chair, casual and natural, like we've done this 100 times before. When I laugh at something his cousin David says about Julian's childhood photography obsession, the sound surprises even me. It's been so long since I've laughed like that, unguarded and genuine, that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. We look like a couple, not the forced, awkward kind of couple that holds hands because they think they should, but the comfortable kind that has learned each other's rhythms over years of practice. When Julian reaches for the salt, I hand it to him before he asks. When I need more wine, he refills my glass without breaking conversation with Amelia's father. Small gestures, but they accumulate into something that feels remarkably like belonging. The other guests make assumptions, and neither of us corrects them. Julian's Aunt Margaret, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s, asks how long we've been together. Julian doesn't miss a beat. Long enough to know we're stuck with each other, he says, his fingers briefly touching my shoulder. I feel heat rise in my chest at the casual intimacy of the gesture, at how easily the lie rolls off his tongue. Amelia's maid of honor, a perfectly composed woman named Claire, mentions that she's glad Julian has someone who grounds him. You can see it in the way he looks at you, she tells me over dessert. Like he's exactly where he wants to be. I glance at Julian, who's deep in conversation with Amelia's brother about camera equipment, and wonder if Claire sees something I've been too afraid to name. As the evening progresses, I find myself settling into this version of myself that exists beside Julian. I'm funnier than I usually am, more confident in conversation. When Amelia's father asks about my work, I tell stories about book restoration that actually interest people instead of giving my usual abbreviated explanations. Julian listens with genuine curiosity, asking questions about techniques and materials like my work matters to him. When I describe the satisfaction of saving a book that everyone else would throw away, Julian nods like he understands something fundamental about who I am. After dinner, we walk the quiet streets of Charleston together, the cobblestones still damp from an afternoon shower that ended before we arrived. The air smells like jasmine and salt water, and the gas lanterns cast everything in warm, forgiving light. Julian talks as we walk, his hands moving as he speaks, and I realize how much I've missed the rhythm of his voice, the way he builds stories like he's developing photographs in a darkroom. He tells me he's terrified of tomorrow, not the logistics of the wedding, not the photographer or the flowers, or whether his grandmother will approve of the menu. He's terrified because getting married feels like stepping into a life he's not sure belongs to him, like wearing clothes that fit perfectly but feel wrong somehow. I listen without offering solutions, because Julian isn't asking for advice. He's asking for witness, for someone who knew him before he became successful and careful and engaged to be married. When he stops walking and leans against a wrought iron fence, looking out at the harbor where lights from distant boats bob on dark water, I want to ask the question that's been building in my chest all evening. Then why are you doing it? But the words stick in my throat, because I'm afraid of what his answer might reveal about both of us. Instead, I stand beside him in comfortable silence, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. The wedding is tomorrow, I remind myself. In 18 hours, Julian will marry Amelia in the hotel garden, and I'll applaud politely and drink champagne and pretend my chest doesn't feel like it's caving in. Then I'll drive back to Savannah and resume my small, safe life, carrying this weekend like a secret I'll never tell anyone. Back at the hotel, Julian hesitates at the door to our room. For a moment, I think he's going to say something important, something that will change the careful equilibrium we've maintained all evening. Instead, he thanks me for coming, for being here, for making everything easier. His voice is soft, almost uncertain, and I realize this confident, successful version of Julian is newer than I thought. Underneath the expensive clothes and gallery success, he's still the uncertain boy who used to stay up too late worrying about whether he was making the right choices. Julian falls asleep on the couch while I smoke a cigarette by the open window, something I haven't done in years but somehow feels necessary tonight. The ember glows orange in the darkness, and I watch Julian in the half-light spilling in from the bathroom. His face is peaceful in sleep, younger somehow, and I can see traces of the 22-year-old who used to sprawl across our dorm room furniture like he owned the world. I realize, sitting there in the quiet hotel room with Charleston sleeping outside our window, how much I missed him. Not just his presence, but the version of myself that existed when we were together. The Nathaniel who laughed easily, who stayed up late talking about books and dreams and the future we thought we were walking toward. I thought I'd outgrown that person, built something better and more sustainable in Savannah. But tonight, I understand I didn't outgrow him. I buried him. The cigarette burns down to my fingers, and I stub it out carefully, quietly, so I don't wake Julian. Tomorrow he'll marry Amelia, and this strange, wonderful interlude will end. But right now, watching him sleep in the soft light, I allow myself to imagine what it would feel like if this was real. If this room, this quiet intimacy, this sense of belonging somewhere belonged to me. The thought should terrify me, but instead it feels like coming home to a house I never knew I'd been missing. The morning of the wedding arrives gray and humid, Charleston wrapped in the kind of mist that makes everything look like a watercolor painting left in the rain. Julian wakes before I do, and I find him standing at the window in yesterday's shirt and boxer shorts, watching groundskeepers arrange white chairs in the hotel garden below. His hair is disheveled from sleep, sticking up in directions that remind me of weekend mornings in our dorm room when we'd wake up late and spend hours talking before getting dressed. He doesn't notice me watching him at first, and there's something vulnerable about his silhouette against the gray light. His shoulders are tense, and he's holding his phone like he's been staring at it without really seeing the screen. When he finally turns around, his eyes are uncertain in a way that makes my chest tighten. "Good morning," he says, his voice rough with sleep and something that might be fear. I make coffee in the tiny hotel kitchenette while Julian showers, and by the time he emerges, hair damp and wearing the white dress shirt that came back from the hotel's pressing service, I've laid out his wedding clothes on the bed like an offering. The sight of them there, formal and final, makes the room feel smaller somehow. Julian stands in front of the mirror, and I move behind him to help with his tie. It's navy blue with thin silver threads, the one I wore yesterday, the one that started all of this. My fingers work the knot slowly, deliberately, aware that this might be the last intimate moment we share. Julian watches my reflection in the mirror, and the silence between us feels heavy with things we haven't said. When I finish with the tie, I smooth the fabric against his chest, my hands lingering longer than necessary. Julian's breathing changes, becomes shallower, and for a moment we're frozen there, my hands flat against his shirt, his eyes locked on mine in the mirror. You were always home to me, you know that? The words come out so quietly, I almost miss them, whispered like a confession he's been carrying for years. I freeze. My hands are still pressed against his chest, and I can feel his heartbeat, quick and unsteady beneath the expensive fabric. The weight of what he's just said hangs between us like something fragile and dangerous. Home. Not friend, not college roommate, not wedding guest. Home. I almost kiss him. The urge is so strong it makes my hands shake, makes my breath catch in my throat. I want to turn him around, to finally close the distance we've been maintaining for 14 years, to answer his confession with my own. But instead, Julian steps back, clearing his throat, his face shifting into a careful mask that belongs to the man who's about to marry someone else. The moment breaks like glass, and Julian becomes the groom again, checking his reflection, adjusting his cufflinks, transforming into the version of himself that belongs to Amelia. I watch him build the wall between us brick by brick, until the man who just called me home disappears behind duty and expectation. The ceremony is beautiful in the way that expensive weddings always are. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arch of magnolia blossoms and Spanish moss, a string quartet playing something classical and romantic. Amelia is radiant in ivory silk, her smile bright enough to power the city, her father beaming as he walks her down the aisle scattered with rose petals. I sit in the third row, watching Julian at the altar in his navy tie, the one that still smells like my cologne. He looks handsome and nervous and like he's exactly where he's supposed to be. When Amelia reaches him, he takes her hands and smiles, and for a moment I can almost believe this is the right ending to the story. But then the minister begins to speak about love and commitment and choosing each other every day, and Julian's eyes find mine across the assembled guests. The world seems to stop. The minister's voice fades, the string quartet becomes background noise. Even Amelia's radiant smile blurs at the edges. There's only Julian, looking at me like I'm the answer to a question he's been afraid to ask. The look lasts maybe 3 seconds, but it feels like confession, like apology, like something breaking open between us. I see everything in his eyes that he couldn't say this morning, everything that's been building since he called me 3 weeks ago. The realization that he's marrying the wrong person, that he's been running from something he should have been running toward, that home was never a place, but a person. I force myself to look away, to focus on my hands folded in my lap, on the program with Julian Morrison and Amelia Crawford embossed in gold script. But I can still feel his gaze like heat against my skin, can still see the desperation in his eyes when I close mine. Later, at the reception, I watch Julian dance with his new wife, while jazz music plays and guests drink champagne that costs more than my monthly rent. Amelia looks beautiful and happy and completely unaware that her husband spent their first dance looking over her shoulder at another man. Julian moves through the motions with practiced grace, spinning her, dipping her, playing the part of devoted groom while his eyes keep finding me across the crowded dance floor. When the song ends, other couples join them, and Julian disappears into the crowd of well-wishers and family friends. I slip away to the hotel bar, ordering bourbon and trying to process what just happened, what that look meant, what I'm supposed to do with the knowledge that Julian Morrison just married someone else while staring at me like I was the one he wanted to pledge his life to. The bourbon burns, but not as much as the image of Julian's face during his first dance, the way he held Amelia while looking at me like he was drowning and I was the only one who could save him. I wake to the sound of a door closing and Julian's absence echoing through the hotel room like a held breath finally released. The morning light filtering through the curtains is harsh and unforgiving, nothing like yesterday's romantic Charleston mist. On the nightstand where Julian's phone usually sits, there's only a folded piece of hotel stationery with my name written in his careful handwriting. Thank you for being here. I don't deserve you. 7 words that somehow contain everything and nothing. I sit with the note for what feels like hours, reading it over and over, trying to decode what Julian means by deserve, what he's thanking me for, what this is supposed to be. An apology? A goodbye? A confession written in the careful language of someone who's spent 14 years learning how to say everything except what he really means. The hotel room feels different without him in it. larger and smaller at the same time, like a stage after the actors have left, but before the crew strikes the set. His wedding clothes are gone from where I hung them yesterday, but my suitcase sits exactly where I left it, unchanged, as if I'm expected to simply pack up and return to my small life in Savannah like none of this happened. I shower and dress slowly, methodically, the way I do everything when I'm trying not to think too hard about what comes next. The hot water feels good against skin that aches with exhaustion and something deeper, something that feels like grief for a future I never allowed myself to imagine. When I emerge from the bathroom, Julian still isn't back, and the silence has weight, like a conversation we're not having. I'm sitting by the window, drinking coffee from the hotel's bone china cups, and watching Charleston wake up below when I hear his key card in the door. It's almost noon, and the checkout time printed on the back of the door says 11. We're officially overstaying our welcome, though I suppose that's been true since we arrived. Julian enters quietly, shoulders slumped, still wearing his wedding clothes from yesterday, but now they look different. Wrinkled, lived in, like costumes from a play that ended badly. His suit jacket is draped over his shoulder, his tie is gone, and his white shirt is unbuttoned at the collar in a way that makes him look younger and more vulnerable. His eyes are red-rimmed, whether from crying or exhaustion or both, I can't tell. I didn't marry her, he says without preamble, his voice hoarse like he's been talking or shouting or both. The words hang in the air between us, impossible and inevitable all at once. He sits down heavily in the chair across from me, head in his hands, and for a long moment neither of us speaks. I can hear the sounds of Charleston outside our window, tourists and locals going about their Sunday morning routines, completely unaware that someone's entire life just shifted course in a hotel room 3 stories above them. I couldn't, Julian continues, his voice muffled by his hands. I stood there at the altar, looking at Amelia, and all I could think about was you. About us. About how I've been pretending for 6 years that what I felt in college was just confusion, just being young and stupid and not knowing the difference between friendship and something else. He looks up at me then, and his face is raw with exhaustion and something that looks like relief. But I kept thinking about yesterday morning, about helping you with that tie, about the way you looked at me in the mirror, and I realized I've been lying to myself about what I want, about who I am, about what home actually means. The coffee cup in my hands is getting cold, but I don't put it down because I need something to hold on to. Julian is telling me he didn't marry Amelia, that he walked away from a wedding, from a life, from everything he's built in Chicago. But he's also telling me something else, something I've been afraid to hear for 14 years. I don't rush to him, don't smile, don't offer comfort or congratulations. Because what Julian just did isn't romantic, it's devastating. Amelia is sitting somewhere in this hotel, probably surrounded by family and friends, trying to understand why the man she loved enough to marry decided at the last minute that she wasn't enough. There's nothing beautiful about that kind of heartbreak, no matter what it might mean for us. Julian, I say carefully, what are you asking me? He's quiet for so long I wonder if he heard the question. Outside, church bells are ringing somewhere in the distance, marking noon, marking the end of what was supposed to be Julian and Amelia's wedding day. Finally, he looks at me with eyes that hold 14 years of questions we never asked each other. I'm asking if I can stop pretending, he says, and his voice breaks slightly on the word pretending, like it's been wearing him down to carry it this long. The silence that follows feels sacred and terrifying, because Julian isn't just asking me to stop pretending we're together for a weekend. He's asking me to stop pretending we're not supposed to be together, period. He's asking me to admit that what started as a game in this hotel lobby yesterday was really just us finally being honest about something we've been avoiding since we were 22. I think about my apartment above Fletcher's Rare Books, about my Tuesday night calls with Caroline, about the careful life I've built that requires nothing from me except showing up and doing the work. I think about Julian's apartment in Chicago with floor-to-ceiling windows, about Amelia waiting somewhere in this hotel for an explanation that will never make sense to her, about the photograph in tomorrow's newspaper that will show a bride standing alone at an altar. But mostly I think about Julian's voice this morning, whispered against my ear while I fixed his tie. You were always home to me. You know that. The truth is, I do know that. I've always known it, even when I was pretending not to. The truth is, he's been home to me too, even when he was engaged to someone else, even when we went 2 years without speaking, even when I convinced myself I was better off alone. Julian waits, patient in the way he's always been with me, like he has all the time in the world for me to catch up to what he already understands. The choice isn't really a choice at all. It's just finally admitting what's been true all along. The drive back to Savannah happens in a different kind of silence than the one that carried us to Charleston 2 days ago. Julian's hand rests palm up on the center console, and mine fits into it like we've been holding hands for years instead of hours. His fingers are warm, slightly calloused from camera equipment, and when he traces small circles on my palm with his thumb, I feel something settle in my chest that I didn't realize had been restless. We don't talk about what comes next. Don't discuss logistics or living arrangements or how Julian will explain to his life in Chicago that he's decided to stay in Georgia with a man he knew in college. There's no grand plan, no declaration of forever, no promises that stretch beyond the immediate truth of our hands intertwined and the knowledge that neither of us wants to let go. Julian drives with the careful attention of someone navigating unfamiliar territory, though the route back to Savannah is the same one we took Friday morning. But everything feels different now. The Spanish moss hanging from ancient oaks looks like benediction instead of decoration. The roadside stands selling boiled peanuts and peach preserves seem charming rather than quaint. Even the afternoon heat, thick and humid in the way that makes your clothes stick to your skin, feels welcoming instead of oppressive. When we cross the city limits into Savannah, Julian squeezes my hand. "Home," he says quietly, and I understand he's not talking about geography. We park outside Fletcher's Rare Books, and Julian stares up at the narrow building like he's trying to memorize it. The afternoon light makes everything golden, softens the edges of my carefully constructed life until it looks like something worth sharing. Mrs. Fletcher waves from her shop window, and I wave back, knowing that tomorrow I'll have to explain why there's a man with a Chicago license plate helping me carry luggage upstairs. My apartment looks smaller with Julian in it, but not cramped. Just more lived in, like it's finally being used for its intended purpose. Julian sets his bag down by the door and doesn't ask where he should put it, doesn't ask if he's staying, doesn't ask anything at all. He just moves through the space like he belongs there, running his fingers along the spines of books on my shelves, examining the antique restoration tools laid out on my workbench with the careful curiosity of someone who appreciates craftsmanship. "You've built something beautiful here," he says, picking up a leather-bound volume I've been working on, a first edition Thoreau with water damage and a broken spine. The way he handles it, with reverence and gentle hands, tells me he understands what this work means to me. I make coffee while Julian explores, and when I find him standing at my bedroom window looking out at the courtyard behind the building, I hand him a mug and stand beside him. The late afternoon light filters through ancient oak branches, dappling everything in patterns that shift and change like breathing. "I used to think this was enough," I tell him, gesturing at the view, at the quiet apartment, at the life I've spent years perfecting. Julian turns to look at me, and his eyes are soft with understanding. "It is enough," he says, "but maybe it could be more." That evening, we eat takeout from the Thai place down the street, sitting on my small balcony while the sun sets over Savannah's historic district. Julian talks about his photography, about projects he's been considering, about whether it's possible to build a career in a smaller city. I talk about a rare books auction in Atlanta next month, about Mrs. Fletcher's suggestion that I teach restoration workshops at the local college, about Caroline's standing invitation to visit Portland for Christmas. Normal conversation, domestic and easy, like we've been having dinner together for years. But underneath it runs the current of everything that's changed, everything we've finally admitted, everything we're choosing to build together. As darkness falls, Julian moves to the couch in my living room without being asked, and I don't suggest he take the bed. We're not rushing toward anything, not trying to make up for 14 years of lost time in a single night. There's tenderness in taking things slowly, in letting this new version of us unfold naturally. I'm reading in bed when I hear Julian moving around the living room, settling in for the night. The sounds are quiet, careful, like he's trying not to disturb my established routines. But they're not disruptions. They're additions, grace notes and a melody I've been humming alone for too long. Later, when the apartment is quiet and Savannah sleeps outside my windows, I listen to Julian breathing in the next room and remember what he said about home. Not a place, but a person. Not a destination, but a belonging that you carry with you. I think about the wedding that didn't happen, about Amelia trying to understand why the man she loved chose someone else, about the explanations Julian will have to make to friends and family, and a life he's leaving behind. There will be consequences for what we've chosen, complications we haven't begun to address. But lying here in my small bedroom, listening to Julian settle into sleep on my couch, I understand something I've been afraid to admit for 14 years. Home isn't the apartment I've built or the routines I've perfected or the safety I've cultivated. Home is Julian's quiet breathing in the next room, the knowledge that when I wake up, he'll still be here. Just for the weekend, you said, I whisper into the darkness, though I know he can't hear me. But I think it's been forever. Outside, Savannah dreams around us, unchanged and unaware that two lives have finally stopped pretending and started becoming real. Tomorrow there will be questions and complications, and the work of building something true from the ruins of what we almost lost. But tonight, there's only this, Julian Morrison asleep on my couch, home at last in the life we're brave enough to choose together.